2014 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It's my privilege to call tonight's meeting to order. We have copies of our agenda on either side of the room, and for those stalwart visitors who are here in the audience tonight that would like to pick up a copy and follow along, please don't crowd one another. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both with respect to items on our agenda, as well as a segment devoted to public comments of a general nature with respect to items not appearing on our agenda tonight, and that is item 4. It is our custom to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, so at this point in time, I would invite everyone to please rise and join us in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much for that. I'd now like to ask our fine village clerk, April Holden, to please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Olson?
Here.
Commissioner Rankin? Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Here.
Commissioner Durkin?
Here.
Mayor Tully?
Here, thank you very much. Brings us to item 3, minutes of prior council meetings. We have one set of meetings tonight to review and approve, and those are our minutes from our regular council meeting on January 14th, 2014. Are there any changes, corrections, comments, or contusions with respect to those minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None? Those minutes?
I'll abstain since I was not present.
Sorry. I didn't ask for abstentions, my apologies. Those minutes are approved by a majority of aye votes with 1 abstention. Just make sure you make a note of that, all right? Thank you. Someday the historians will want to look back on that. That brings us to item 4, public comments of a general nature with respect to items not appearing on tonight's agenda. Are there any public comments of a general nature from any members of the audience with respect to items not appearing on our agenda tonight? After a deliberate pause and hearing none, we will move on to item 5, council member reports. This is the portion of the meeting that is set aside to invite council members to report out goings-on and other items of significance within the community. Commissioner Barnett, anything to report out tonight?
I do not, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Olson, welcome back. Any items to report out?
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Durkin frequently talks about shopping in Downers Grove, and today is my father's birthday, and I was able to shop and buy his birthday gift in Downers Grove. So I just want to remind everyone, even though it's not Christmas or holiday season, remember to shop in Downers Grove and encourage your friends, even if they don't live in Downers Grove, to come here and shop.
And eat.
And eat. And spend time and enjoy and then move here. Thank you very much.
You gotta like the exuberance of youth, don't you? Well, happy birthday to Mr. Olson. Commissioner Neustadt.
I have no report tonight, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think I could top that infomercial, so I will refrain from reporting. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Durkin.
Ditto.
Very good. I have nothing to report at this time, so we'll move right into to item 6, which is devoted to public hearings. We have no public hearings tonight, so we'll go right to item 7, our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to any of the items on the consent agenda? Hearing none, any questions or comments from any members of the village council with respect to any of the items on the consent agenda? Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved. We already did it.
We have one.
May I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, then a roll call, please.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Consent agenda passes unanimously. Brings us to number 8, our active agenda. No items in our active agenda tonight, so right like that, we are on item 9, our first reading, or the workshop portion of our meeting. We have 2 items tonight, items 9A and 9B. 9B for fans of the council will quickly recognize it to be a continuation of our ongoing conversation. But before that, we'll begin with item 9A, and it is customary to turn this over for presentation to our village staff for discussion and consideration by the village council and potential action at a future point in time. Mr. Fielding, good evening.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. Here tonight is our Public Works Director, Nan Newland, to present consideration of an award of contract for construction management services. Nan.
Good evening.
Good evening, thank you. This is going to be our largest capital project this year in the village, so I wanted to take a couple of minutes and give you a background on this project. This is in the Esterbrook and Downers Grove Estate subdivisions. 63rd Street is on the north side of this project, Main Street is on the east, and Dunham Road is on the west, so it is quite a large area in the village. And we are scheduled to complete water main replacements, drainage improvements, and roadway reconstruction activities in this area this year. It's included in the Community Investment Plan for 2014 as 5 different capital projects, which are combined for cost savings, improved coordination, and better communication and coordination for our residents. The first part of the project is going to be a water main replacement. This work occurs first, and this occurring, we'll be replacing about 1 mile of new water mains, fire hydrants, and water valves on Powell, Barrett, Norfolk, and Saratoga. This is a typical trench. The water main is in the street, so we'll be coming in, cutting the street, putting in a new water main, and then abandoning the old water main. We're also going to be completing drainage improvements in this area, which will include storm sewer replacements, some regrading of our ditches, driveway culvert replacements, solutions for problem drainage areas within this area, and we'll be providing the option to residents, and we have been starting to communicate to residents about that, the ability to incorporate some green infrastructure, some rain garden type approaches to the ditches. This is kind of a typical cross section, which will allow some more deeply rooted plants, some more, it has water quality benefits, and it helps slow down the runoff of water. And this will be only if residents care to participate in this program. It's not a required component of the project. This is some pictures of some of this type of project in some other areas. In combination of water main and drainage, we'll also be doing some significant street improvements in this area. This graphic here shows what we'll be completing on 10 village streets, including Powell, Barrett, Saratoga, Carpenter, Adelia, Carroll, Norfolk, Oxford, Palmer, and Sailor. The streets shown in the light blue will be traditional reconstructions. The western portion of Norfolk will be resurfaced, and the streets shown in green are proposed for a process called full depth reclamation. What this is a process where the existing pavement and the base are ground up, mixed with cement and other additives to increase the strength of the base, and then overlaid with a traditional asphalt surface. It allows for the reuse of the existing materials on the site rather than hauling them away and then bringing in new material. It's about half the price of a full depth reconstruction and is more environmentally friendly. The process will create less inconvenience to residents, will have less downtime for the streets in front of their homes, and will involve less trucking and less street closures. This can't be used everywhere, just so you know. I mean, we've been doing already a number of reconstructs in the village, and there are only specific streets, and our staff's been searching. As we approach street reconstructs, they've been testing the material to see if it would qualify for this type of process. It has been used by surrounding communities, and we've been working with them and going to those sites and monitoring those constructions, so we're confident in the process. We've been looking for the right material in the street to be able to use this process and save money. Just to give you an overview, you've seen this chart a number of times in our budget process. These are the streets we identified for reconstruction. The 5 projects in the top are the ones we completed in 2012 and 2013. The red checks are the 2 projects we're talking about today or tonight. The 3rd project that will be completed this year is at Brook and Center, and we'll be seeing contracts for that forthcoming. The schedule for this is that we kicked off the work this year with a neighborhood meeting. Andy Sikich is here. He's our engineering manager. Dan Kamichek is here. He's our staff. He's going to be our staff managing the project. They held a meeting with our residents about a week ago. We will be wrapping up plans. We took a lot of public comment at that meeting. We'll be incorporating those comments as we complete the plans. We'll have a follow-up meeting with the neighborhood in March, and we anticipate construction starting in April. In addition to the full depth reclamation, the second, I think, new approach on this project that we're seeing is that we are recommending the use of a construction manager, which is the topic of the item that's being presented to council tonight. Staff recommends hiring a construction management firm to oversee the combined project instead of hiring general contractors contractors to manage and construct the work for each subdivision as is more conventionally done. The bid packages will be prepared and awarded to trade contractors, and the construction management will coordinate between those contractors, just like a general contractor would. In this case, they're going to be working for the village. The benefit of this approach is it will include lower construction costs to the village, better coordination of work, and reduce impacts to surrounding residents by having one coordinated manager for the entire package of projects. An RFP was advertised for this work and 4 proposals were received. Staff recommends award of the contract to V3 Construction due to their experience, understanding of the project, proposed scope, and fee. V3 has previously provided construction services to the village on projects. They did a Second and Cumner stormwater facility. They were the construction manager for that project, and the Carpenter Street storm sewer improvements. And those projects went very well. We were very pleased with their work. In addition, they performed construction services for Elmhurst Memorial Healthcare Company in Elmhurst and College of DuPage in Glen Ellen. And we received very positive recommendations for those projects. So the item is to award a construction management contract for this work to B3 Construction in the amount of $207,900, which includes a 5% contingency that would be approved by the village manager and staff if we were to need that additional funding. So that's my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Terrific. Thank you very much for that, Nan. Any questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to this item, 9A? Hearing none, any questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Commissioner Olson?
With this, the full depth reclamation process, the lifetime of the street the same as if it's a traditional reconstruction?
But as far as I know, it is.
I anticipate that it will be. This process isn't very old, so there aren't streets that are 100 years old to really test that by. But with the cement that we have, we anticipate that it will be.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had, there in the council responses, it says, does the project include widening street pavement? Streets in Downers Grove Estates will be widened to a minimum of 20 feet. And you probably may not know this now, but what streets currently are not at that minimum of 20 feet?
We can get you a summary of that.
That'd be appreciated. Thank you. That's all, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Durkin?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. This is similar. This construction manager is similar to what we did and had huge success, in my opinion, with the owner's rep for the redevelopment and construction of Fire Station 2, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I know that project, we were fortunate where it came in under budget. It was done earlier than anticipated. Are there any incentives with this contract, and I didn't have a chance to look at that, for V3 if this were to come in under budget and is completed much earlier than a deadline? I know we're saying November. Is there any of that language in there, or is it just, I'm not that familiar with how construction manager parts of it work. I know contractors have those perks in them.
There's a couple of ways to go about using a construction manager, some at risk, some with incentives and penalties. This is a not at risk concept, so this is sort of the more traditional way to use a construction manager. It's identical to the services and the approach we use in Fire Station 2. We expect a similar set of outcomes. That's why Nan has those kind of items on the screen. We've already sort of taken into consideration the lower overall cost due to this approach, and you'll see that in the bid prices when they come through.
Okay. And then, Nan, you had mentioned that this is a relatively larger job that we're doing, project in the community. Have we done any in the previous years similar to this size?
Yeah, Nottingham was pretty similar. In that whole entire subdivision, we did water, storm sewer, and street reconstruction. Each year, we've been doing some pretty large projects. This will be comparable to the projects we've done the last 2 years.
Because of this approach with the construction manager, is it because of lessons learned with the Nottingham and the issues we faced there with utilizing staff or deploying staff to different work areas or needs? I guess what I'm really getting to is more of why this particular project, when in the past we didn't do. I know the manager and I've had these, and I support this. I just think, you know, people are going to look at this and ask questions, and then if they review the questions council have asked, you know, this just to get more light on the overall 200-some thousand dollars we're looking at here.
We've done some large projects before, and we've certainly bundled projects together, storm sewers, water mains, street recons. But this is the largest and most complex. So this is 4 different types of construction activity over a very large area. And just having the dedicated firm, not just a person at the firm, but the whole firm that can bring all those different resources to coordinate this project is why we're recommending it here.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions from members of the council? I was simply going to ask the same question, or just ask for some clarification about how this equates to the owner's representative concept we've used in the past, but you've already covered that, and I think that's maybe a term that people are more familiar with some projects that we've handled in the last 10 years, and that has worked out very successfully. So I'm assuming this is one that, because of its complexity and size, rises to the level where it's in the same sphere as some of those other projects where it was deemed appropriate to do this because it guarantees, or not guarantees, but it increases the likelihood that we're going to have a high-quality project done on time and within budget and to our exacting standards. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Nan.
And the next item is continued discussion of the amendments, complete rewrite, actually, of the zoning ordinance. In here to continue the presentation and discussion is our Community Development Director, Tom DeBreyer.
Good evening, Mr. DeBreyer. Welcome back for the next installment in the zoning tour de force.
Cannot live up to that kind of introduction, so, but I appreciate it.
We find it very fascinating. You have a captive audience here.
I do, that's my only advantage. This is part 2 of a series of presentations on the zoning ordinance update, and tonight we're focusing on districts and uses. You'll recall, or for those of you just tuning in, last week we were focusing on the administration and process sections of the zoning ordinance. Tonight it's districts and uses, as I mentioned, and then right now we're looking at February 11th for some additional regulations and nonconformities as an issue. And then, of course, our goals, just to repeat, are to make a document that's simple, attractive, and easy to use. I think we've got a lot of items tonight that really are in place because it makes it easier to use for everyone. Recognition also that this is a built-out community now and has a different set of requirements as a result, compared with when there was more room to build first buildings, new construction. And then really village needs and consistencies, and then really best practices. Let's see what is out there and what we should be doing. The articles that are highlighted in the blue are the ones that we covered last week. Coming up then are tonight are the ones highlighted in yellow: residential districts, business and employment districts, special purpose districts, allowed uses, and supplemental use regulations. And these are all generally related. And then the ones that are not highlighted at all are the ones that we're hopefully going to focus on February 11th. And again, we're using the concordance of notable changes as kind of our guide as we go through this. So with that, I'll just jump right into Article 2. And again, that's residential districts, and there were 2 areas of notable changes here. The first, I should point out, one of the explicit goals as we were going through this process, one of the directions that we strived to follow was that we wanted to minimize the changes as much as possible to the residential districts, to provide some certainty going forward. So everything that you see here really it isn't changing that much, and in fact it's probably helping and clarifying. So the first thing is to combine the R5A district with the R5 district. There are absolutely no regulatory differences between the two. Historically, the R5A was created to accommodate a new thing called townhouses. I think we're okay with the townhouse concept now. So we're going to blend those districts, at least that's the recommendation, is to blend those districts together and then rename it as kind of an attached housing district. The second item are some minor bulk and density changes, things like making the maximum height 35 feet for all residential, single-family residential districts. Right now, it varies between 35 and 33 feet, not really sure why. Just to try to make it a uniform 35-foot height. And that's just one minor example. Again, it really makes it a little less restrictive rather than more restrictive. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at there. That is it for the residential district section. If there are any questions, otherwise I'll move on to the next.
I did want to note that we've received several council questions on some of these topics here tonight. During the 2-week break that Tom spoke of, we will actually put those questions in writing and their responses in writing, so we can have further discussion on those items as we move forward in February.
I got a question. What's the, what process exists for us, and it's kind of tangentially related, I suppose, for just changing existing zoning? They've got a little bit of consolidation happening here, but as we've seen in not too distant past, there are some areas that probably, in hindsight and moving forward, we might wish, from a planning standpoint, were zoned differently.
There isn't really a short answer for that, and it can be handled in any number of different ways. In some cases, it may be advantageous to kind of sit back and wait for changes to be proposed property to property, and in other cases, it may be advantageous for the village to proactively go out and rezone large areas. There are notice requirements that would be involved in all of those cases. Certainly, public meetings that we would require would want to be held. As part of that, it would go through a plan commission process and notice process. But in terms of specific tools related to how would we make this change, we haven't really discussed that yet.
There would be some of that as a function of eliminating a zoning.
That's correct. In this case, with the elimination of an R5A and renaming it to R5A, a combination, obviously we'd have to go and initiate at that time any rezoning from an R5A to the R5, because we would not want to end up with a district listed on a map that doesn't have a corresponding place in the zoning ordinance. So in that case, it would have to be a village-initiated rezoning once the zoning ordinance is approved, and we should do that in a timely manner.
Go ahead.
So when we do that type of village-initiated rezoning, could we perhaps determine that maybe R5, the new R5, it may not be the appropriate zoning classification, and we choose that maybe, I don't know, R1 or 4 or something is more appropriate at that time?
Yes, that kind of discretion, the council does have that kind of discretion. That would have to come out during the public hearings, and there would have to meet certain standards for that type of rezoning. This is more of a housekeeping type rezoning. When Tom mentioned that there's no real regulatory differences, that's more of an administrative approach to a rezoning. The type of rezoning you're talking about would have to meet certain standards as we go through, and we could address those in the council responses in the coming weeks.
Appreciate that.
I'd like to just solicit that kind of from certainly everybody up here. You know, I don't mean to just complicate this process with a whole other one, but it certainly brings something before us. And as we've seen, we're not typically going meeting to meeting looking for subjects because we're bored. So while this is on our minds and we've seen some recent events, I hope that we'd all give that some thought.
Well, if I understand what's being proposed is if we need to, as a housekeeping matter, go through the notice process and the other procedural requirements in order to rezone, to eliminate the fact that there is no longer an R5A category, but to formally make it there's no R5A anymore, it's now just R5, so that everything jives. If you're going to go through all that, if there were, at the same time there was some other rezoning that you wanted to do, you could piggyback on it, is what I'm understanding, because we always had the discretion to initiate a rezoning regardless of this exercise. So I'm assuming there's a efficiency of piggybacking on a larger effort that is being suggested.
Yeah, you could use efficiency, or just because when are we going to come back to this voluntarily? That doesn't seem terribly likely.
No, but the only thing it's, we seem to trigger is because we happen to be thinking about it and we're
Right.
doing it on a broad scale
Right.
anyway for housekeeping. It would be, if you're gonna hold a public hearing anyway involving a neighborhood because of a housekeeping rezoning, if you're gonna do something more substantive than that, that would be, I would, it seem to make sense to include something else at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
And I suspect, I mean, you know, we're the last people that know you, and your crew probably can rattle off the things that might make sense just right this second. And so just, I'd like us all to
I'm
be
not going
talking
to,
about it. No, right, but I mean, more, it's not like it's a research project. Those guys know this in and out, and which areas are problematic and challenges right now, so.
And for the record, you were about 8.5 minutes into the presentation before you lost control of it. Any other questions or from the audience with respect to the residential district topic? Hearing none, please proceed.
All right, Article 3 covers business and employment districts, and just to be clear, this does not include the downtown business district and downtown transition district. We've placed those districts under the Article 4, which is special purpose districts, better suited for discussion there, and I will touch on an item or two on the next slide. Here, really, we're only talking, again, about a couple of categories of changes. One is fairly specific, and that is 3.030 on page 3-2, excuse me, and that's to eliminate the 10,000 square foot maximum floor area for a B1 business. And really, we saw that maximum floor area as kind of an unnecessary limitation to a business that is growing and successful. And it doesn't affect a lot of the community, really only the area by the train station in Fairview. That's really probably our biggest B1 district right now. And it is by definition a limited retail business area. So, but we did not want to force people to have to move, basically, because they were successful and growing. The other item are some transition areas between business and residential. There are a few points there, and the diagram kind of highlights one of them. But here, really, we're just trying to clarify, simplify, eliminate redundancies, and the source for pursuing this was found in the comprehensive plan. Those are the changes, the notable changes proposed for Article 3. Be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thanks. Tom, was there any historic basis for the 10,000 square foot limitation on maximum floor area in B1? Was that just...
Right, we really didn't find any, and unless the consultant stumbled on something en route. I'm sure somebody chose that number for some reason, but we didn't.
But the reasons are lost to history?
Correct.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Burnett?
Yeah, related to that, is there, you know, maybe not within the history of Downers Grove, is that something that other communities use, and is there a typical reason for it? And somebody put it in for some reason, maybe we don't know why here, but is it used elsewhere and why? What's the normal application?
Typically, when a number is provided, it's because, you know, they saw something that they liked in other communities, as opposed to have done some kind of indigenous study to show that 10,000 feet is significant. So you're probably on track with something there, but it's not something that we've identified. And again, we're more concerned, I think, that we would be chasing people out of these successful businesses out of these smaller areas.
I've seen this in a couple of their ordinances, and it seems to be rooted in 1960s approaches to zoning, where if you're trying to create a neighborhood shopping district, you want to make sure that it's not built up with large boxes. So it makes sense to limit at the time your community is growing in a greenfield development. I've seen it a couple times, but in rewrites, usually it goes away, especially in mature communities where your buildings are largely already established.
There was another note about the minimum 100-foot setback from residential not being included. Am I reading that right? Existing ordinance includes a minimum 100-foot setback from residential not included in this draft.
Commissioner, can you repeat that? I don't think Mr. Daybrenner can hear you.
I'm sorry.
I think it's just
There's
you were turned away from him.
Yeah, and then I'm challenged. There's a note about a minimum 100-foot setback from residential being in the existing ordinance, but not included in this rewrite draft.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about that, why it's not included, and what the up or down
The
side of it?
100 feet seem to be excessive given what exists out there. In fact, we reduced it to 75. I think that's on the next page, without having to look it up.
Oh.
But I would be happy to do some additional research and provide a written answer on that. That is, in fact, one of the written questions that we've already received.
Oh, is it? Okay.
So, yes.
I don't have a big feeling one way or another, but I'd like to understand why we think why the recommendation is what it is, and what we think the impact of it would be.
Other questions from the council or any members of the audience at this juncture? I know we caught you mid-step, but as long as we were pausing. Please.
All right. So Article 4 focuses on special purpose districts, and here we're going to talk a little bit about downtown, the downtown business district, as well as introduce a couple new concepts. First of all, we are recommending under 4.010, paragraph D, something called a downtown building build to zone. And really the purpose here, well, this is rooted in the comprehensive plan and the pattern book, promotes pedestrian-friendly environment, provides some economic value and sustainability as well, along with some of the other recommendations in this section. But really what we're talking about is something like this that produces a zone from the back of the sidewalk, which would essentially be a zero setback from the sidewalk, back edge of the sidewalk, something that really doesn't go deeper than 10 feet. And the point of this is really to make sure that we're not creating these kinds of unwelcome cavernous areas in the downtown, which is supposed to be, friendly and, welcoming and pedestrian oriented. So we're limiting some of the depth there. And this is a tool that is pretty commonly in use now, and increasingly in use in downtowns across the country, really. And some are more restrictive than the 10 feet. But that gives us a little bit of room for outside displays or tables, things like that. The second item is 4.020, which is creating something new, and that's an institutional and public district, zoning district. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in a second. The goal here obviously is to promote some transparency, predictability, and the comprehensive plan is again the source here, as it is for the third item, which is the planned unit development overlay district. And I will talk about both of these now in just a touch more detail. The institutional and public district, or INP as we're referring to it, district, is intended for public, civic, and institutional uses, things like churches, government buildings, the hospital. All of these right now, or most of them, are found in residential districts. And it seems a little bit incompatible with residential because all of these things operate many days of the week, if not all days of the week, as almost a business functioning in a residential district. The reason for really exploring an institutional and public district is twofold. It does promote the interests of the institutional activities and kind of protects them, provides them with some certainty as far as the future goes. And then secondly, it provides the residential uses around it some protection as well. And it also gives us an opportunity to clarify the code. And the Downers Grove North High School fence is a really good example. When we were drawing up the language for that to allow a fence around the parking lot, Downers Grove North parking lot to the east, we were really kind of dancing around and, because it's all in a residential district, right? So we're defining, this new size fence that can be allowed in a residential district and then kind of subtracting out by exception where it can't be allowed. And it really becomes kind of a cumbersome ordinance, kind of a wordy ordinance, as opposed to being able to say, you know what, in INP district, you can have this kind of fence with this trigger. And that really would have made it much more simple, would have made it more understandable for the property owner, in this case, the high school, as well as others, churches, however we choose to define this. So we can talk about buffers and the like, and really allow the two to better coexist. So the ordinance, as it's written, is proposing 2 levels of INP districts. One would be a neighborhood scale, less than 4 acres in size, and one would be INP 2, which is a larger acreage, and that would require some form of a master plan so that we as the village can plan ahead and understand fully the impacts of that particular institutional use on the neighborhood. And again, this would be for school campuses, hospitals, government campuses, things like that. That's really what we're looking at. The Planned Unit Development Overlay District is something that really is almost more of a map item, promoting transparency and simplification. And again, the comprehensive plan is the source. The intent here is to accommodate, because we have planned development agreements already. This is very similar. It would accommodate the desired development, which is not easily carried out under typical zoning standards. It would establish standards and objectives for creating the district. And then you would see on the map very clearly these things defined as, for example, B3 PUD. So it would be obvious, it would be apparent that there's a different agreement that we need to turn to in those cases. So that's what that is looking at. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions about any of those items.
Questions from the audience on any of the items thus far? Questions from the council?
I get some, sorry. Am I the only,
No?
I'm the only one not quick enough to keep up, I guess.
Keeping the dialogue going, good.
I go back to the build too, if you could. Sometimes it's easier, for me at least, to think in terms of specific examples. So in this case, what it would be eventually preventing would be another development like we have where Rogers meets Maine. That little strip essentially would, this type of inclusion would essentially prevent another development like that. Is that?
That would be one example, and it doesn't entirely prevent it because somebody would be able to come and apply and make their case for something different. So, but that would then be a case that would
Sure.
come before everyone. This would provide basically, this would tell everybody with certainty that this is what we want to achieve. Pedestrian-friendly environment that doesn't create something that might be outmoded the second that particular use is gone. Really, it's looking at the long-term usefulness of these buildings, and there's actually been study after study done that shows the pedestrians' comfort level in terms of where they are in relation to the buildings, the height of the buildings, and the like. And this really speaks to those kinds of features.
Okay. On the INP, again, do you see us making a point of going ahead and changing folks as a function of adopting this? I mean, not adopting this, but the next step would be we would go ahead and make those changes?
Yes.
Okay. What, how do you see that in terms of the actual effect on folks in those areas right now? I mean, do we see that there would be people who would have, as a function of this change, would have challenges to their current operations, or do we see it as largely not an effect?
We try to write this ordinance so that we would accommodate the existing activities and existing layouts of those types of institutional governmental uses that Tom spoke of. We're well versed in them. We've dealt with them over the years because of the challenges of allowing them to function and operate in residential districts. So we would try to basically write this and have drafted this in a way that should do exactly what Tom had outlined, which is protect their rights, allow them to continue to operate the way they are, and add some flexibility to things that we've approved in the past, like the fence example, and still protect the residential neighborhood around it.
In some of those instances, I know at least 3 or 4 of them, those institutions have ownership of adjacent or nearby parcels, many cases adjacent. Would you see a process where we would be consulting with them to find out whether they'd like those additional parcels included or not? I mean, it's a little bit like that consolidation. If we press consolidation, it has the potential to diminish future value, at least in theory. I wouldn't want to necessarily be doing that, you know.
That is really one of those very points that you mentioned would be included in that master plan discussion. So really, with that master plan in place, this really becomes their tool, one that, has been worked through with the village, but it becomes their tool. They can include what they feel is appropriate, and we understand where ultimately what ultimately their plans are for the future, so that we can plan for its impact around and on the road network.
Generally speaking, we don't recommend rezoning a parcel, like a house that's owned by a school district, until we have the master plan. So if they're not ready for that property to be master planned, we would recommend keeping it residentially zoned. Once we have an understanding of the plan, then it would behoove us maybe to go and work with them on a rezoning.
Right. And from a village-initiated rezoning standpoint, this is something that is more probably a piecemeal approach rather than coming to you with one big plan, because we want to work with each of the property owners to understand what their goals are.
I'm thinking primarily not of government buildings, but some of the private entities, whether they're churches or hospitals or the like, they, in some instances for sure, some of their ability to finance has to do with property owned that's zoned in such a way that they're not using it right now. And I wouldn't want to be sort of the village compelling them to include something in IMP that diminishes their ability to raise revenue in the
Correct.
future.
It's not our goal.
Okay. I had another question about one of the drawings. It's on 4.3, and I wanted to see if I'm understanding it. In particular, figure 4.2. Tell me how 4.2 and 4.3 relate to each other relative to sort of intended use down the road. What I'm getting at is, in our DB in particular, the idea of wall-to-wall development seems to be sort of, if I'm reading this right, and maybe I'm not, seems to be kind of discouraged, and yet I don't know that I want to be saying that.
Well, these diagrams all only reflect the relationship between downtown business and that's abutting a residential.
And the R, not
Right.
not DB to, not downtown to downtown.
Right,
Okay,
exactly.
all right.
Where we still encourage
Yeah,
zero
okay,
lot.
good. That's what I didn't want to be trying to discourage that. Okay, that's all I've got.
Other questions from the council? I just want to go back to INP1 for a second and make sure that I understand it. With the new INP1 category, by the way, I get INP2, that makes perfect sense given the scale that we're talking about there, but in the INP1 on the neighborhood scale, just to make sure I understand this, in an INP1 category, basically you would have to comply with the same zoning as the most restrictive zoning that abuts the parcel, which in some cases could be a 75 by 75 lot, depending on where it is. But you would not have to comply with the minimum lot area requirements, the minimum lot width requirements, or the minimum street frontage requirements. I'll take that as a yes. My understanding is correct. And I pause there on purpose. But if I'm reading table 5.1 correctly, it would require a special use?
Yes, for any new approvals, correct.
Okay, so essentially, even though there's significant additional flexibility in terms of the massing, if for lack of a better word, that you could put on a residential parcel in a residential neighborhood, it would have to go through the full-blown special use process in order to be approved in the first place. So all the normal considerations can be taken into account that we do with any special use.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the clarification. Other questions?
All right, let me jump ahead here. Article 5, under 5.010, really covering 4 or 5 pages within this document, you'll find the new consolidated use table, and we kind of floated it behind on the screen here a little bit, just to give a sense. Now, this has been already, for me personally, and just an extremely useful way to summarize our uses and requirements for the village. There have been a handful of proposed changes associated, but compared with the length of the list, it's really minor. But this is the source to go to when you get those questions about what use can be allowed in what district and whether it's permitted use, special use, or not allowed in any particular district. This was something that really came out of the comprehensive plan, but this is a vast improvement over having to go, to this district, then page through some more and go to this description and page through some more and, and try to find these lengthy lists and see how they match up. And that is the process that we use today. But secretly, that's not the process I'm using today. I'm already relying on this table because it is that good of a tool. So that's something that we're doing now. We did make a point of adding sheltered care, which is a subject that we've dealt with in the past, whether or not it was included, the library, museums, trying to make sure that we've are allowing uses that, in fact, we don't want to eliminate in town, and that's why we made an effort to include those there. That's under 5.010. The table 5.030 to 5.0100 really takes all of these uses, kind of all of these use categories, kind of reorganizes them in a way that defines them kind of more broadly so that it has more applicability as we encounter new uses or new requests in the future. We think that that's really important because this is not a document that should lay stagnant and really unusable when we encounter something new. So it gives us, I think, more tools to assess new uses as they come forward in the future. And then finally, under 5.050, pages 5-11 to 5-13, we do list some changes to some uses or propose some uses that might be prohibited. This is under additional review. This entire line item we want to bring back at a future date and the February date. So that's really where that's sitting right now. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions on Article 5.
Thank you. I just have to say the chart is fantastic. I used it just a few moments ago.
Did I overshow my excitement about it?
No, it's a terrific tool.
Kind of a planning nerd, it's really kind of a great thing.
Well, whether you're a planning nerd or in other worlds a procedure nerd, it's a very useful tool. It really accomplishes that user-friendly aspect that I know was a goal that we were trying to accomplish. It's really well done and easy to follow and understand. Commissioner Newsom.
Can you give me an example of what a natural resource preservation area might be? It's under the public, civic, and institutional.
Sure.
I probably should know what it is, but I can't think of it.
Well, really, any natural area that we have, a large natural area.
Lyman Woods.
All right.
I'm
trying to
Lyman
Woods.
That's what I was kind of heading towards, just wanted to check. But it's
Right.
because it's allowed in all the zones, so.
Yes.
Okay, that's it, thanks.
That would be most likely applicable relative to our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, given the current state of our village, if some entity, some government entity would find itself purchasing residential lots, right? I mean, the most likely sort of new occurrence and why there would be, we would want to say it's permitted.
Correct.
A park district buys 3 houses on 55th Street and knocks them down, kind of a thing.
Exactly.
Okay, and as it relates to us relative to stormwater, the potential for naturalized areas and things along those lines would also be in there,
Sure.
kind of covered by that, right?
Yes.
Right.
What's a minor utility?
A minor utility.
Oh, minor utility is yes, a minor utility would come under that typically a small acreage INP1 category.
What would an example of a minor utility be?
A
Newstead's wind
utility,
farms?
a water tower. A water tower would be an example.
Water tower,
yeah.
okay.
Typical uses include water and sewer pump stations, gas regulating stations, underground electric distribution substations, electric transformers, water conveyance systems, stormwater
Did you
facilities.
jump to the
and
glossary?
Somebody's
Wind.
reading the ordinance.
It's Newstead's wind farm, I'm telling you.
Emergency communication warning / broadcast facilities.
Could
Those are minor
you,
utilities.
could you
Just
write
off the
up,
top of your head?
No, that's,
Sorry.
it's in the glossary.
I have a
Page
little,
5.10.
I have a little question about daycare home as a permitted use in R1 through 5 by right, not special. Could you guys just comment on that? Maybe not right this moment, but
Yeah, that's one we'd like to do a little further review and commentary on. It was asked by a couple other commissioners in the preliminary discussions. We'll get a memo out on that one as well.
We currently don't license those, right? We don't really oversee them, do we? The state does, correct?
And that's
State.
part of the answer, correct, but we need to be able to accommodate them.
so this is like pot farms. We have to find a place to put them. Because the state says so?
Can't be located
Sorry.
daycare centers and the dispensaries.
I'm just trying to make Enza and Dave crazy tonight.
It's working.
So speaking of farms, crop agriculture is a permitted by right in all of the residential zonings. So is that saying if I could buy property and farm on it?
Yes?
Agriculture.
You don't want a little corn to go with your chickens?
So you know, when we talked about when Dan earlier about the ditches, we're gonna put corn stalks in there. So
Couldn't even make a data clock without a chicken
Winter
run.
wheat.
I am gonna grow corn in my house this year, right next to my wind turbine.
Jeff's getting off the grid.
So
Well,
so the
it's
tassel can get caught in the fan, and the,
But yeah, so somebody could buy an adjacent parcel to their home, knock it down and turn it essentially into pure garden?
into,
We
well, I
can
mean,
try to do it.
so I'm not saying garden, I'm talking about like, you know, you buy a property and we're growing corn and it's gonna be 7 feet tall and it's gonna go right up to the sidewalk. That's
and the
where-
bugs come with it, I live behind a cornfield.
So, I mean, not that I don't think, I think it's unlikely, but it's just. Sure. The other question on this use table, downtown business district, fueling stations and vehicle sales and rentals are special use categories. To me, it just seems a little inconsistent, especially fueling stations with the development pattern in a downtown to have a fueling station be allowed at all. That's just my opinion. I'm just putting that out there.
Is that limited to petroleum?
Yeah, what about a charging
Charging
station?
stations or CNG?
Right, it includes the alternative fuel, and I think what we were thinking more along the lines of was the electronic charging.
Okay.
But that could, yeah,
Right.
the consultant who's pulling the little string on the back of my, is reminding me that this reflects the current ordinance. And,
Right. And once upon a time, there was a fueling station in the downtown.
Correct.
Yeah.
Fueling stations,
Right,
yeah.
right. No, but what I'm suggesting is that perhaps land use has changed, the village has changed. It's part of the reason we're rewriting the zoning ordinance. And perhaps fueling stations, you know, whether alternative, you know, electric vehicle charging station could be put in the parking deck or something like that, certainly no objection to that. But whether we're allowing fueling station. So it's just a,
I think it's a real good question that we want to probably all digest a little bit more.
right.
Yeah, we'll take a shot at giving more information on that when we provide further information on 5050, talking about the modifications or prohibitions of use.
I think some of the concerns can be addressed by the fact that it is a special use, which would have to come before us.
Well, agreed with that, but I understand there are times.
Well, one of the things we
We're
were
gonna
trying to
take a
do,
look at
one of the things we were trying to do before, last week though, is to try and make those more clear and more straightforward and kind of,
Right.
you know, they still have to come before us, but we're also trying to make it pretty obvious what we really plan to allow.
Sure.
And so in that vein, I tend to, my first reaction to that is not so positive.
Other questions, Council?
That's all I have.
All right.
The final article tonight.
Standards for electric car charging stations.
And really, I didn't want to spend a lot of time on each of these, unless, of course, you want to, but I wanted to just highlight some of the things that are in the supplemental use regulations that do reflect a notable change, and that is, we've modernized our satellite dish requirements, where, you know, back in the 1960s and 70s, the satellite dishes were huge and quite noticeable if they were in your front yard as opposed to now. So these requirements have been modernized along with the ham radio antenna regulations. And we do get inquiries about ham radio still, so these requirements have been modernized to under 6.010C, under 6.010D. We are expressly prohibiting the donation box, donation drop boxes, which some of you will recall was a big effort a couple of years ago to clear those in the community, and this is just making it ever the more clear, I guess, that we don't appreciate those in town. 6.010 sets some standards for electric car charging stations. This comes out of the comprehensive plan, as well as we keep getting inquiries. I don't think we have one yet, but we keep getting inquiries about possible future installation someplace. Geothermal energy under that same section J, paragraph J. We actually do have geothermal energy, and if you're not familiar with it, it's not as hazardous as it sounds. Nothing's going to explode typically. No, it's really a very common and actually a pretty cost-effective way to cool and heat your home. Much more common, and we're going to see more of it. Under 6.040, we did eliminate some of the gas station requirements as well as funeral home regulations because the gas station requirements were extraordinarily redundant throughout the ordinance. And then for funeral homes, which will be in a business district, they will be simply subject to those business district requirements, whereas under the current ordinance, they're allowed in residential but with business district standards. So it's kind of a mismatch there, and they can be handled much more cleanly, transparently through this process. Be happy to try to answer any questions about Article 6.
Thank you. Questions either from the audience or any members of the council? Commissioner Barnett.
I apologize for not knowing the technology behind satellite dishes, but we've gone through some efforts in recent development agreements, applications of OASIS, and then also some writing here relative to rooftop screening, typically commercial settings. Is it technically reasonable? Forget about policy for a moment. I'd like to know if it's technically reasonable, operation of the dish itself, for us to compel those to be not visible from the street. In other words, backside of the main slope on homes. I don't know the answer, but I'd like to.
Just
I
anecdotally,
remember the FCC dictates, there's a lot of protection with the Federal Communications Act, because I remember when I was in Darien, we had a lot of these, and they were the 6 or 8 foot dishes that people had at the time. Plus those ham radio, or we referenced before, where these towers would go up and they'd be stories tall. And if I remember correct, we faced that, and there was a lot of protection for these users to have that we as a government could not make any change or recommendations. You can ask the resident, but I think it's a lot to do, and I haven't looked into that for a while yet.
Well, we'll take a look at it and see if there are some options there. I will say, many, many years ago, when I was very, very young, there was a lot of consternation over television antennas on top of roofs. And eventually people kind of got used to them. And the satellite and dish antennas now are are smaller than those. And actually,
Like a pizza box.
right. And not much bigger than an extra large pizza.
We
And-
can answer both those questions. We can answer is it technically feasible, and we can answer how the Federal Telecommunications Act of 96 still applies as it's been modernized. So.
That's it, yeah.
But I think to that point, if you look at like a multiple family use dwelling, like apartments and some townhomes, you see 5 or 6 of those things on the side of the building. You know, I think they ought, we put ours in our old house, they have to point to the southwest or something to pick up the
Right.
south, is it southeast? To pick up the satellite, so there may be some.
I don't know the answer, it's one I'd like to have answered.
Yeah.
You know,
We'll
to your
take a
point,
look
Jeff,
at it.
if you have a 2-flat, or a 3-flat in a house, you know, if we were able to not infringe on their usage ability and still compel them to have it on the back, I think, for me, that'd be preferable. If we can't do it, we can't do it.
Part 97 of the FCC rules, maximum height of 200 feet from ground level. Unless you have local zoning requirements to the country. But yeah, that's the FCC rule. And there's more to it. Local rules can limit it to 30 feet. Part 97. Other questions? All right, we're learning a lot tonight.
So on our February 11th council meeting, we plan on having written answers to the questions that we've received to date. So you'll have those, and we can clarify our answers at that point. We also intend on spending some time with the remaining articles, which focuses on things like parking and landscaping and other regulations, as well as the nonconformities issue, which is kind of a key issue, I think, for Downers Grove, because we're, as I've mentioned several times now, we're a built-out community, and how we look at our nonconformities, I think, really will speak to how we grow or reinvest in the future. So, thank you very much.
Just a question
Sure, go ahead.
on the schedule. We'll have that meeting in February. Is the intent then to collect any additional feedback from the council, public, and then come up with a sort of a final compiled draft? Is that the intent?
We'll put the questions and answers out before February 11th, and we'll have that discussion, and then we'll do exactly what you described, Commissioner, and then we'll put together more answers, more comments, and then come back to you with a final draft at a future date.
And I just would like to request, given the length of this and the complexity of the zoning ordinance change, that after the February 11th meeting, once we take all the Q&As and we come back with a finalized draft, I'd really like for that to come back to first reading one more time before we vote on it.
Sure.
Just to allow both the council and the public additional time to review and ask additional questions that may come up in another reading of it. So
Project's been in the working for about 50 years. We can, a couple more weeks is going to make.
I just want to make sure we have enough time for the process, so I appreciate that.
No, it should be deliberate.
And Mayor, to your point, it has been in a process for a long time, and we've got, I know for myself, I'm going to probably need more time than folks wish, because there certainly is this in front of us, but there is this in front of us with respect to comprehensive plan that we're going to want to, for me, I need to be sort of trying to make sure that before I'm inclined to say, yeah, I think we should do this, that they're together. We have an architectural review report, we have a comprehensive plan, we have a series of documents that have in one way, shape, or form, feed various pieces of that. And so, I suspect you guys have meshed them pretty well, but I need to process all that. It's an opportunity. It's a pretty cool opportunity, as dry as it might seem some nights.
Yeah, I don't see any reason to be anything other than deliberate about the process. Other questions? I just want to add, because we've commented that the process can be dry, and we've interjected a fair amount of levity into both last week's presentation and this one, and made some tongue-in-cheek comments, but all kidding aside, this is a major, major undertaking, and we don't want the levity to in any way undermine or disrespect the substantial contributions of a number of people to put this together. This is not an easy task, to say the least, and I've really been impressed with how it reflects best practices and has really achieved an ease of use characteristic that is no small task. So as we continue to go through this, I just want to make sure that, for the record, everybody understands that we do appreciate that, notwithstanding some of the levity and tongue-in-cheek comments,
Thank you very much, Mayor.
mostly from me.
And that ends our first reading tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And more to come on that, as was previously stated. That brings us to the end of item 9 and on to item 10, the mayor's report. I have no separate report tonight, so that will bring us then to item 11, village manager's report. Mr. Fieldman?
No report tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Go right to item 12, the village attorney's report. Ms.
No
Petrarca?
report tonight.
No report. Okay, that brings us to item 13, lucky 13, council member, new business. Any members of the village council, any items of new business they would like to raise with the rest of the council tonight? Seeing none, brings us to item 14. I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. We are adjourned. Good night, and please stay warm. Thank you.